August 1812. Smolensk burns. Napoleon stands in the ruins of what should have been his greatest victory. The city is a skeleton. No supplies. No Russian army waiting to surrender. Just smoke and empty streets, and the smell of deliberate destruction. His marshals are confused. This isn't how it works. You invade, you force battle. The enemy sues for peace. It has worked in Italy, Egypt, Austria, Prussia. 15 years of nearly unbroken victory have taught them the pattern. But the Russians aren't following the pattern. They're burning their own country as they retreat. Every village, every grain store, every bridge. The Grande Armée, the largest military force ever assembled in Europe, marches through a landscape being systematically erased. And Napoleon's certainty, built on decades of triumph and meticulous planning, is beginning to encounter a reality that his maps never showed. This is the story of reasonable assumptions meeting unreasonable scale, of competence colliding with conditions no one had faced before, of the moment when the most successful military mind in Europe discovered that past success is the worst possible guide to unprecedented circumstances. Napoleon doesn't invade Russia on impulse. He invades because every calculation suggests victory. By 1812, he has won approximately 60 battles and lost perhaps 7, depending on how you count. His strategic pattern is reliable. Concentrate overwhelming force a decisive engagement, shatter the enemy's will, dictate terms. It worked at Austerlitz in 1805. One battle, Austria out of the war. It worked at Jena-Auerstedt in 1806. One campaign, Prussia obliterated. It worked at Friedland in 1807. Russia itself sued for peace and became an ally. The pattern is empirically validated. But by 1812, Russia is violating the continental system, Napoleon's economic blockade of Britain. Tsar Alexander is trading with the enemy. The alliance is collapsing. France's security requires compliance. Every military and diplomatic calculation points to invasion as necessary. So Napoleon prepares the most thoroughly planned military operation in human history to that date. The logistics are staggering. He establishes 3 main supply bases: Danzig, Thorn, and Königsberg. He stockpiles 50 million rations of biscuit, hardtack baked in specially constructed ovens across Germany and Poland. He assembles 200,000 horses. He creates mobile supply columns with 26 battalions of transport troops. He organizes field hospitals, bridging equipment, portable forges. Contemporary accounts describe supply depots that stretch for miles. Mountains of grain sacks, hundreds of wagons in precise formations. This isn't Napoleon being reckless. This is Napoleon being careful. His intelligence network reports that Russia has perhaps 200,000 troops available along the western frontier, divided between Barclay de Tolly's First Army and Bagration's Second Army. Napoleon assembles 685,000 men. The Grande Armée includes French, Poles, Germans, Italians, Dutch, a multinational force representing most of Europe. It's not just the largest army ever assembled, it's the best supplied. The assumptions are reasonable. Russia will concentrate its forces and offer battle within 200 miles of the border. They always have. In 1807, they fought at Friedland. In 1805, at Austerlitz. Russian military doctrine emphasizes decisive engagement. Napoleon's intelligence chief, Savary, reports that Tsar Alexander's advisors are divided, his logistics are poor, and a swift campaign will force capitulation before autumn. The medical staff prepares for wounded, not disease. The cavalry is sized for pursuit and exploitation, not for foraging across a devastated landscape. The plan assumes a summer campaign, 6 to 8 weeks, decisive battle, peace treaty, Return before winter. Everything is calculated. Everything is precedented. Everything is reasonable. Napoleon crosses the Neman River on 24th of June 1812 with an army that represents the pinnacle of military organization. His marshals are veterans of 100 engagements. His staff has managed campaigns across deserts and mountains. His logistics train is the most sophisticated Europe has ever seen. What they don't plan for is an enemy who refuses to fight. An enemy willing to burn their own empire to deny the invader. An enemy who understands that space and time can be weapons. The Russians have a different calculation. Survive until winter. Late June 1812. The Grande Armée crosses the Neman. The advance begins. Within days, the first anomalies appear. The weather turns. Not the heat they expected. Rain. Heavy, persistent rain that turns roads into mud. The supply wagons, carefully calculated for dry summer roads, begin to lag. Horses develop sores from wet harnesses. The mobile supply columns, designed to move 20 miles per day, struggle to make 10. But it's early days. Adjustments can be made. Early July 1812. The army advances through Lithuanian territory. They expect requisition. It's standard practice. You forage from the countryside. You buy supplies from locals. You supplement the supply train. The villages are empty. Not abandoned, emptied. Grain stores removed or burnt. Livestock driven east. Wells filled with debris. The inhabitants have retreated with the Russian army, or hidden in forests. The Grande Armée is marching through a landscape being systematically depopulated ahead of them. This is unexpected, but Napoleon has supplies for 3 weeks. The Russians can't evacuate everything. Keep advancing. 15th July, 1812. Forward scouts report that Russian forces are withdrawing without offering battle. Barclay de Tolly's army is retreating eastward. Bagration is moving to join him. This violates Russian military doctrine. It violates the entire premise of the campaign. Napoleon sends cavalry probes to fix the enemy position. They find rear guards, small forces that skirmish and withdraw. Not a battle. Not even a significant engagement. The army has now marched 200 miles. The decisive battle should have happened by now. Typhus begins to appear in the ranks. The disease, spread by lice and exacerbated by crowded conditions and poor hygiene, hits the supply columns first. Medical staff treat it as a minor problem. By mid-July, perhaps 6,000 men are sick. Compared to an army of 685,000, this is within tolerable margins. 28th July, 1812. Napoleon's brother, Jérôme, commanding the southern flank, is dismissed for failing to cut off Bagration's retreat. The command structure is solid, but the Russians keep slipping away. It's infuriating, but not yet catastrophic. Supply wagons are now averaging 300 miles from the main depots. The mobile columns are consuming their own supplies faster than planned. Horses are dying, not from combat, but from exhaustion and contaminated water. The army begins eating horse meat, which is not in itself a crisis. Cavalry has always been an emergency food source, but the cavalry is what finds the enemy. Fewer horses means poorer reconnaissance. Poorer reconnaissance means more uncertainty. 1st August, 1812. First formal investigation. Marshal Berthier, Napoleon's chief of staff, conducts an assessment of supply status. His report concludes that magazines in Vilna and forward depots contain sufficient supplies for current operations. The medical crisis is noted, but characterized as manageable. Typhus is a known risk, and field hospitals are treating patients. The investigation's conclusion: logistics are strained but adequate. The primary problem is not supply, but the Russian refusal to engage. Recommendation: Accelerate the advance to force battle before the enemy can concentrate further east. This assessment is reasonable. The depots do contain supplies. The problem is getting them to the army, which is now 400 miles from Vilna and still marching east. But Berthier is one of the most experienced staff officers in Europe. His assessment is trusted. 17th August, 1812. The Grande Armée reaches Smolensk, a major Russian city, a fortress, a logical place for Russia to make a stand. There is a battle. 2 days of fighting. The French take the city, but it's burning. The Russians have set Smolensk aflame before withdrawing. The supply magazines Napoleon expected? Gone. The infrastructure? Gutted. The civilian population? Fled or dead. This is the pattern now. Every town, every village, every resource is being destroyed ahead of the French advance. The Russians aren't fighting for territory. They're trading territory for time and denying the invader everything. Napoleon stands in Smolensk and faces the calculation. He is 500 miles from his supply bases. His army, which crossed the Niemen with 685,000 men, now counts perhaps 185,000 combat-ready soldiers in the main body. Where have the rest gone? Dead, perhaps 50,000, mostly from typhus and dysentery. Hospitalized, another 80,000, too sick to march. Garrisoning supply lines, 100,000, left behind to guard depots and communications. Desertion, 60,000, mostly among the German and Italian conscripts. Detached forces and stragglers, another 200,000 spread across 500 miles of increasingly hostile territory. The army has lost 73% of its strength without a major battle. At Smolensk, Napoleon's senior officers, Murat, Ney, Davout, argue for halting, consolidate, wait for spring, bring up supplies. The campaign can resume next year. Napoleon calculates differently. He's 220 miles from Moscow. If he halts now, the Russians consolidate, and the entire campaign achieves nothing. One more push. Take Moscow. Russia will negotiate. It has to. Capitals are symbolic. You don't abandon your capital unless you're surrendering. Reasonable. Precedented. In 1805, after Austerlitz, Austria sued for peace. In 1806, after Jena, Prussia collapsed. In 1809, after Vienna fell, Austria negotiated. Taking the capital ends the war. The army marches east. 7th September 1812. The Battle of Borodino. Finally, a battle. The Russians have concentrated their forces 70 miles west of Moscow. Kutuzov, now in command, has chosen defensive ground. Earthworks, artillery positions, clear fields of fire. He will fight. The battle lasts from dawn until nightfall. It's one of the bloodiest single days in the Napoleonic Wars. The French lose perhaps 30,000 casualties. The Russians lose perhaps 45,000. The artillery barrage is so intense that men describe the ground shaking. At day's end, the French hold the field. The Russians withdraw. By the standards of European warfare, this is a French victory. But Kutuzov's army is intact. He retreats in good order. He does not surrender. He does not negotiate. He marches away, and Napoleon, too weak to pursue effectively, lets him go. This is not how decisive battles work. Decisive battles break the enemy's will. The enemy collapses, sues for peace, offers terms. Austerlitz was decisive. Jena was decisive. Borodino is merely expensive. But Moscow lies ahead. Capitals are decisive. The army marches on. 14th of September, 1812. The Grande Armée enters Moscow. The city is empty. The governor, Rostopchin, has evacuated the civilian population. The fire brigade has been disbanded. The fire pumps have been removed. That night, fires start. Multiple locations, clearly deliberate. By the next day, Moscow is an inferno. Three-quarters of the city burns over the next week. Wooden buildings, churches, shops, homes, everything combustible is consumed. Napoleon occupies the Kremlin, surrounded by a burning wasteland. There are no supplies, no functioning infrastructure, no Russian delegation arriving to negotiate surrender. September-October 1812. Second formal investigation. General Count Daru, the Intendant General responsible for supply, conducts an assessment of the army's situation in Moscow. His report examines remaining supplies, foraging capacity, and options for winter quarters. Findings: the army has perhaps 3 weeks of food in Moscow, mostly scavenged from private homes and unburned districts. Foraging parties sent into the surrounding countryside return with minimal supplies. The area has been stripped. Horse deaths now exceed 1,000 per day from starvation and disease. Typhus cases are estimated at 30,000. Daru's conclusion: Moscow cannot sustain the army through winter. Options: advance further east to find unspoiled territory. Rejected, army too weak. March south to Ukraine, where supplies might be available. Risky, lengthens supply lines. Retreat west to Smolensk, consolidate for winter, most feasible. The investigation is thorough, but it fundamentally assumes Russia will negotiate. Daru's report notes that Tsar Alexander has not responded to French peace overtures, but interprets this as a temporary diplomatic posture. The assumption remains: occupying the capital creates leverage. The Tsar will negotiate to recover Moscow. 5 weeks pass. No negotiations. On 19th of October, Napoleon orders the retreat. Late October 1812. The temperature drops. It's early for severe cold, but this is Russia. Freezing rain, then snow. The army, which expected to be in winter quarters by now, is marching west through increasingly hostile weather. The retreat begins as an orderly withdrawal. Within days, it disintegrates. Supplies along the retreat route have been consumed during the advance. The magazines at Smolensk, which the army expected to replenish from, were already depleted. Foraging is impossible. Everything was stripped months ago. Men begin to starve. Horses die in staggering numbers. Without horses, wagons are abandoned. Without wagons, artillery is abandoned. Without artillery, the army loses its firepower. Without cavalry, reconnaissance fails. Russian Cossack forces, which have shadowed the retreat, now attack with impunity. Typhus, which has been simmering for months, explodes. Men too weak to march are left behind. Desertion accelerates. Discipline collapses. By early November, the temperature is regularly below freezing. Men without proper winter clothing, because the campaign was supposed to be over by now, begin to die of exposure at night. 14th November, 1812. The first catastrophic cold snap. Estimates place the temperature at 20 °C. Men wake to find comrades frozen to death beside them. Horses simply collapse and die. The army is no longer retreating. It's staggering. French military surgeon Dominique Leray later describes the medical situation. Frostbite so severe that limbs must be amputated without anesthetic. Typhus spreading through the ranks faster than it can be treated. Starvation causing men to lose the ability to march. The field hospitals, already overwhelmed, are abandoned as the army retreats. Thousands of wounded are left behind. 26th to 29th November, 1812, the Berezina Crossing. The final disaster. The Grande Armée reaches the Berezina River to find the bridges destroyed. Russian forces are closing from 3 directions. The river is partially frozen, ice too thin to walk on, too thick for easy fording. French engineers, standing waist-deep in freezing water, construct 2 pontoon bridges. It takes 36 hours. Men die of hypothermia while building them. Then the crossing begins. 40,000 men, with perhaps 10,000 stragglers and civilians, try to cross on two narrow bridges under Russian artillery fire. The panic is total. People are crushed. People drown. The bridges partially collapse and are repaired. Russian guns fire into the mass of humanity. When it's over, perhaps 20,000 have crossed. The rest are dead, captured, or scattered. The numbers make the truth undeniable. On 5th December, near Smolensk, Napoleon leaves the army and races back to Paris. He leaves Murat in command. The remnants continue west. By mid-December 1812, when the Grande Armée staggers back across the Neman, French military officials conduct the first accurate count. Combat effective soldiers, approximately 27,000. Sick and wounded who made it back, perhaps 13,000 more, most of whom will die in the following months. The army that crossed into Russia with 685,000 men returns with fewer than 40,000 in any condition to fight. The ratio is almost incomprehensible. 94% casualties. For every 17 men who invaded, 1 returns combat-ready. To put this in human terms, imagine a football stadium holding 50,000 people. Now, imagine only 3,000 leave. That's the ratio, applied to an army that spanned most of Europe. But the scale is even worse when you count auxiliaries, camp followers, and support staff. Total personnel who entered Russia, closer to 750,000. Total who return, perhaps 80,000. That's 89% gone. The losses break down. Dead from combat, approximately 100,000. This is the smallest category. Dead from disease, primarily typhus, 220,000 or more. The medical journals from French hospitals in the following years document the typhus epidemic that swept through the retreating army and then spread back to Europe with the survivors. Dead from starvation and cold, 200,000. Larry's surgical memoirs describe bodies found frozen by the thousands along the retreat routes. Captured, 100,000. Russian records document massive prisoner hauls during the retreat. Many of these men die in captivity. Deserted or missing, 100,000 or more. Thousands of men, especially non-French conscripts, simply vanish into the Russian countryside. Some settle in villages. Some die alone. Some are killed by partisans. The horse casualties are equally staggering. Of 200,000 horses that entered Russia, fewer than 5,000 return. That's a 97.5% loss rate. Without horses, 19th century armies cannot function. The cavalry is gone. The artillery train is gone. The logistics system is gone. The entire operational capacity of the Grande Armée has been obliterated. In Paris, the loss is initially concealed. The 29th Bulletin of the Grande Armée, published on 16th December, acknowledges difficulties but frames them as temporary setbacks. The full scale of the disaster is suppressed for weeks, but you cannot hide 650,000 missing men. By January 1813, the truth is spreading across Europe. The letters home, or rather, the lack of letters home. The hospitals filling with frost-bitten, typhus-ridden survivors, the widows, the orphans, the empty barracks. Napoleon's aura of invincibility is shattered. The states he conquered begin to calculate rebellion. Prussia defects. Austria wavers. The Sixth Coalition forms. Within a year, Napoleon will lose again at Leipzig, the Battle of Nations, where his enemies, emboldened by proof that he can be beaten, will field overwhelming force against him. Within 2 years, he will abdicate and be exiled to Elba. The Russian campaign doesn't just destroy an army. It destroys the illusion that Napoleon's pattern is invincible. It destroys the certainty. The immediate aftermath is administrative and human collapse. In January 1813, Napoleon begins conscripting the class of 1814 early. Boys as young as 17 are called up to replace the 650,000 men who aren't coming home. He rebuilds an army within months, a testament to French industrial and administrative capacity. But the quality is nothing like the Grande Armée. Veterans are gone, experience is gone, the medical system nearly breaks. Typhus, brought back by survivors, spreads through French military hospitals and then into civilian populations. Larry's records describe hospitals in Germany and Poland overwhelmed with cases. Exact civilian death tolls from the epidemic are unknown, but estimated in the tens of thousands. The financial cost is never fully calculated. The supply depots, the wagons, the horses, the equipment, all lost. France's treasury, already strained by continuous warfare, approaches insolvency. The Bank of France restricts credit. Inflation rises. But the political reckoning is immediate. In Russia, the victory transforms Tsar Alexander's reputation. He becomes Alexander the Blessed, the ruler who defeated Napoleon. Russian Orthodox Church services celebrate divine intervention. The strategy of trading space for time, burning Moscow, and outlasting the invader becomes enshrined in Russian military doctrine, a doctrine that will be repeated against Hitler in 1941 to 1945. Kutuzov, who commanded at Borodino and orchestrated the harassment of the retreat, becomes a national hero. He dies in April 1813, before the final defeat of Napoleon, but his legacy is secure. Among Napoleon's marshals, the campaign produces bitter recriminations. Ney, who commanded the rearguard during the retreat and whose personal courage saved thousands, becomes the bravest of the brave. But he never forgives Napoleon for the decision to advance beyond Smolensk. Murat, left in command after Napoleon's departure, abandons the army in January 1813 and returns to his kingdom of Naples. He's vilified for desertion, but privately he tells confidants that the campaign was doomed from the moment they entered Moscow. Davout, perhaps the most competent of the marshals, writes in his diary that the failure was not one of tactics, but of assumptions. We calculated for war. Russia conducted survival. The silence from Napoleon himself is revealing. In his memoirs, written years later on St. Helena, he attributes the disaster to the early winter, unseasonably severe cold, and Russian barbarism in burning their own territory. He never quite acknowledges the fundamental miscalculation, that an enemy might refuse to play by the rules of European warfare. This is not dishonesty. It's incomprehension. Napoleon's certainty was built on 15 years of validation. The pattern had worked dozens of times. That Russia would refuse the pattern, would burn Moscow, would sacrifice hundreds of thousands of their own people, would endure occupation rather than negotiate, was outside his mental model of how wars end. In 1814, after his first abdication, Napoleon is exiled to Elba. He escapes in 1815, rallies France for the 100 Days, and meets final defeat at Waterloo. But Waterloo is a footnote. The disaster that truly breaks his empire happens in Russia in 1812. The coalition armies that defeat him at Leipzig and invade France in 1814 would never have dared if Russia hadn't proved he was mortal. The legacy reverberates for decades. European military academies study the campaign as a cautionary tale. The lessons drawn are various. Don't invade Russia in summer if you can't finish before winter. Don't assume the enemy will fight by your rules. Logistics constrain strategy more than strategy admits. But the deepest lesson is about certainty itself. Napoleon's planning was meticulous. His army was the best supplied in history. His calculations were reasonable based on all available evidence. He didn't fail because he was careless. He failed because the precedents that informed his certainty were insufficient guides to unprecedented conditions. Russia was larger than the terrain he'd fought on before. The willingness to sacrifice Moscow was more extreme than any strategy he'd encountered. The logistical challenge of supplying an army 500 miles from depots, in territory being systematically destroyed, exceeded what 19th-century transport could sustain. Past success predicted future failure. Today, if you drive the M1 highway west from Moscow towards Smolensk, you pass through countryside that looks peaceful. Farms, villages, forests. There are few monuments to mark the path of the Grande Armée, but near the Berezina River in Belarus, in the village of Studenka, there's a small memorial, a stone marker, a plaque in French and Russian. It commemorates the crossing of November 1812. The inscription is simple. It lists no blame. It records the date, the event, the scale of loss. Tens of thousands died here in 3 days, crushed between a river and pursuing armies. The plaque doesn't explain why they were there. It doesn't need to. They were there because every calculation suggested Moscow would end the war. Because the pattern had always worked. Because certainty, built on decades of success, proved to be the most dangerous kind of ignorance. The river still flows. The bridges are modern now, solid and safe. The engineering is better. But the lesson remains. Reasonable assumptions, taken to unprecedented scale, become